That's what's at stake when people deny that God is sovereign over sin. God is not sovereign over sin, then he's not sovereign over mankind at all. All things are through God as the agent and executive of creation, of providence, and redemption. That's what Ephesians 1 verse 11 states. It refers to him who worketh all things after the counsel of his own will. The counsel of his own will, that's his eternal decree, and then God works all things after, according to, in executing the counsel of his own glorious will. Of him and through him are all things. That's why our text begins, "Oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and knowledge of God." All things are through him because he is armed and equipped with perfect knowledge and wisdom. When we talk about God's knowledge, we mean that it is infinite, without limits. So that God's knowledge embraces past, present, and future. Everything on earth God knows about, including the secret thoughts and intents of every human heart. Past, present, future, on earth and the entire universe. God's knowledge embraces also the actual and the possible. And if you think about the possibilities are billions upon billions upon billions. You could scratch your right ear now or your left ear and you can pause, and you can do it. And that's one person for 1 second of the life. And then God knows that. That's all the possibilities. And every human being and every plant and every creature that moves at the bottom of the sea, God knows not only what will actually happen, and he knows that through his decree, but he knows every possibility and every permutation of every possibility. And all of this, the actual, the possible, of past, present, and future for the universe, is always perfectly before his mind. Now we say we know certain things. Maybe you know the capital of Sweden, but it's not before your, maybe now though, but it's not always before your mind. Most of what we know, the vast majority of what we know, is not before our mind at all. Only a tiny percentage of what, but God knows all of what I've said, and it's always, all of it, before his mind. And you think that's knowledge? Well, it is. But that doesn't make God's knowledge infinite. And that, what I've spoken about, is not even the tiniest percentage of God's knowledge. God's knowledge is infinite, not because he knows everything in the universe, past, present, and future, that it's always before his mind, and he knows all possible permutations. God's knowledge is infinite because he knows himself. God's knowledge was infinite before the creation of the world because he knows himself. Oh, the depth, says Paul, of the knowledge of God. For who, verse 34 asks, who hath known the mind of the Lord? Who knows God's mind? Quoted from Isaiah chapter 40. No man of himself ever has or ever will know anything of God's mind. But the Spirit knows God's mind, because the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. That's the work of the Spirit. The Spirit does that in the Godhead. The Spirit does that when he saves us, because with the Spirit in our hearts, he shows us the gospel, and that gives us the true, but very limited, knowledge of Jehovah. That's God's knowledge in brief. God's wisdom then is for us humans a step beyond that, because that's God's perfect ability to adopt and use his infinite knowledge for the highest end, which is his own glory. That's wisdom. The first thing about wisdom is to have the right goals in mind. God has the right goal in mind. That's why he's wise. And that's why mankind, no matter how much he may know or thinks he knows, is always a fool. Because total depravity means he never puts God's first. So he can't be wise. He hasn't got the right goal or end in view. So he's a fool. God is infinitely wise because he always has himself as his goal, because he's holy and consecrated to himself. God's wisdom then is, secondly, that he always and with everything directs it perfectly to this goal. That's the other problem with our wisdom in earthly things. We don't put God first, and then, because we don't know much, we don't adapt what we know to achieve that high end. And so God asks, who hath known the mind of the Lord? Nobody. Or who hath been his counselor? And Paul there is asking, as God does to Job, where were you? Have I ever turned to you for advice? What have you got to add to me? When I have the depths of wisdom and knowledge at my disposal, and then think of the wisdom and knowledge of God which he displays, for instance, in the first 8 chapters of Romans. This shows us a little bit of the all things which are wrought through God. All things are out of God by his decree, everything is through God, so that the whole world, Jew and Gentile, is guilty before God, and every mouth is stopped. Nothing to answer back to God. Abject humility for once. And then God says, once your mouth is stopped, and you consider yourself as you really are, depraved and wicked, but now God has in Jesus Christ brought redemption through the blood of the cross for Jew and Gentile. And then, moving into Romans 4 and 5, here is my knowledge and here is my wisdom, that I can declare you perfectly righteous with the righteousness of my own Son in justification, the righteousness of God in Jesus Christ. And here is my wisdom too, that I fashion you through regeneration and the ongoing work of sanctification more and more in the likeness of Christ. And here is my knowledge in you by the Spirit, so that you are assured, you know you are saved. Romans chapter 8. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. And coming closer to home, or rather the subject in Romans 11, that is God's ways with Jews and Gentiles, we have God's knowledge and wisdom coming to us in the parcel called mystery. Mystery. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in.